Wyoming Territory, 1883. The endless prairie stretched like a sea of golden grass beneath a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon whole. In this unforgiving landscape where dreams came to die as often as they were born, desperate men made desperate choices, and sometimes those choices led to miracles nobody saw coming. What happens when a man marries not for love, but for survival? When duty becomes the foundation for something neither party expected. This is the story of Samuel Crawford, a failing rancher who agreed to a marriage of convenience to save his dying spread, and Rebecca Miller, a woman carrying secrets that would transform 8 young lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Broken Arrow Ranch as Samuel Crawford stood on his sagging porch, surveying the remnants of what had once been his father's pride. The wooden fence posts leaned at odd angles like broken teeth. The barn roof showed gaps where shingles had blown away in the last storm, and the pastures that should have been dotted with healthy cattle held only a handful of scrawny steers picking at the sparse grass. At 32, Samuel possessed the weathered face of a man who had aged beyond his years under the relentless Wyoming sun. His dark hair, prematurely streaked with gray, fell across his forehead as he bent to examine the broken step that had been promising to fix for months. Everything on the Broken Arrow seemed to be falling apart, including his dreams. The ranch had been in the Crawford family for 15 years, carved from the wilderness by his father, Jonathan Crawford, who had arrived in Wyoming Territory with nothing but determination and a wagon full of hope. Jonathan had built the Broken Arrow into a modest but profitable operation, running 200 head of cattle across 3,000 acres of prime grazing land. The ranch had supported the family comfortably until a series of catastrophes struck. Like dominoes falling in sequence, first came the brutal winter of 1880, when temperatures dropped so low that cattle froze standing upright in the fields. Samuel had lost nearly half his herd that winter, watching helplessly as animals that represented years of careful breeding and investment succumbed to the merciless cold. The financial blow had been devastating, but he had managed to rebuild, slowly, taking on debt that strained his resources but offered hope for recovery. Then his father suffered a stroke while repairing fence line in the spring of 1881, leaving Samuel to manage the ranch alone while caring for an invalid who required constant attention. Jonathan Crawford, once a towering figure of strength and determination, had been reduced to a shadow of his former self, unable to speak clearly or move without assistance. The medical bills from the doctor in Cheyenne had consumed what little savings remained, while the ranch's operations suffered from Samuel's divided attention between business and caregiving. The final blow came with his father's death 6 months later, followed immediately by the revelation that Jonathan had borrowed heavily against the ranch's future to fund improvements that never materialized. The debts, hidden from Samuel to protect him from worry, now threatened to destroy everything the Crawford family had built. The bank in Cheyenne held notes totaling nearly $3,000, a sum that might as well have been $30,000 given Samuel's current financial situation. Samuel walked slowly toward the barn, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. From the hard-packed earth, the building that had once housed 20 horses now held only his aging gelding, Thunder, and a milk cow whose production had declined along with her advancing years. The empty stalls seemed to mock his failures, reminding him of better times when the Broken Arrow had been a thriving operation that employed seasonal hands and contributed to the local economy. Inside the barn, Samuel retrieved his father's ledger from its hiding place behind a loose board. The leather-bound book contained the brutal arithmetic of his situation, monthly expenses that exceeded income by nearly $50, debts that grew larger each month due to accumulated interest, and a dwindling herd that could not possibly generate enough revenue to reverse the downward spiral. Even if he sold every animal on the ranch, the proceeds would barely cover half of what he owed. The kitchen of the ranch house retained traces of his mother's touch, though Martha Crawford had died of pneumonia 3 years earlier, leaving behind only memories and the comfortable furnishings she had chosen to make the harsh frontier feel like home. Samuel prepared his simple breakfast of coffee, eggs from his few remaining chickens, and bread that was growing stale because he lacked the energy for regular baking. The silence of the empty house seemed to amplify his isolation, reminding him that he was facing these challenges entirely alone. As he ate, Samuel's mind returned to the conversation he had avoided for weeks. His neighbor, Henry Morrison, had mentioned hearing about a woman in Kansas who was seeking a practical marriage arrangement after being widowed with significant responsibilities. Morrison had suggested that Samuel's situation might benefit from a partnership with someone who understood the demands of frontier life and could contribute to the ranch's operations rather than merely adding to its expenses. The idea of marriage had seemed impossible to Samuel since his father's illness began. What woman would willingly tie herself to a failing ranch and a man whose prospects grew dimmer each month? His few romantic relationships had ended when the women involved realized that his devotion to the ranch and his ailing father left little in time or energy for courtship. Now, with his financial situation desperate and his social isolation complete, the possibility of finding love seemed as remote as the distant mountains that ringed the valley. But Morrison's suggestion had planted a seed of possibility that grew stronger as Samuel's options dwindled. A marriage of convenience might provide the partnership he needed to save the ranch, while offering a woman security and a home in exchange for her contributions to the operation. It was a practical arrangement that had worked for many frontier families, where survival often mattered more than romance and mutual respect could grow into deeper affection over time. The morning's work consisted of the same routine that had defined Samuel's days for months: checking on his small herd, repairing equipment with salvaged materials, and maintaining the ranch buildings with whatever resources he could scrounge. Every task reminded him of how far the broken arrow had fallen from its former glory. Fences that had once been straight and strong now sagged under the weight of neglect, while pastures that had supported hundreds of cattle showed the effects of overgrazing by the few animals that remained. Samuel's relationship with the neighboring ranchers had grown strained as his financial difficulties became apparent. Men who had once treated him as an equal now viewed him with the uncomfortable mixture of sympathy and superiority that successful people reserved for those who had fallen. From grace, invitations to social gatherings had become rare, partly because Samuel lacked the time and energy for socializing, but also because his presence reminded others of how quickly fortune could change in the unforgiving frontier environment. Isolation had become a significant burden, as Samuel struggled with decisions that might have benefited from experienced advice. His father had been his primary counselor and mentor, the source of wisdom about ranching, business, and life that Samuel had taken for granted until it was gone. Now, facing the most critical decisions of his life, he felt adrift without the guidance that had always been available during his father's lifetime. The afternoon brought a visit from Thomas Bradley, the banker from Cheyenne, who held the notes on Samuel's ranch. Bradley was a thin, precise man in his 50s who approached financial matters with the dispassionate efficiency of someone who had foreclosed on dozens of failing operations. His presence at the Broken Arrow was never a welcome sight, but Samuel had learned to maintain cordial relations with the man who essentially controlled his future. Samuel Bradley said, dismounting from his buggy with the careful movements of someone unaccustomed to physical exertion. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit, but I wanted to discuss your situation before things progress any further." They sat on the porch, looking out over the struggling ranch, while Bradley reviewed the financial documents that told the story of Samuel's declining fortunes. The banker's assessment was delivered with professional detachment, but Samuel could sense the underlying sympathy in his voice. Bradley had known Jonathan Crawford personally and had watched the family's rise and fall with genuine regret. "The bank's position is becoming increasingly difficult," Bradley explained, his tone suggesting reluctant necessity rather than eagerness to foreclose. "The board of directors is pressuring me to resolve outstanding debts, and your account has been delinquent for 3 months now. I've been able to delay action because of my relationship with your father, but I can't postpone indefinitely." Samuel nodded, understanding the banker's position while feeling the weight of impending disaster settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The ranch represented everything his family had worked to achieve, the embodiment of his father's dreams and his own identity as a rancher. Losing it would mean abandoning not just his livelihood, but his entire sense of purpose and belonging. "How much time do I have?" Samuel asked, dreading the answer but needing to know the parameters of his situation. Bradley consulted his papers with the thoroughness of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "I can give you until the end of October, perhaps November, if you can make a substantial payment to demonstrate good faith. After that, I'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." The timeline was impossibly short, given Samuel's current resources, but it represented more time than he had dared hope for when Bradley's buggy had appeared on the horizon. October was still 2 months away, providing a window of opportunity if he could somehow generate enough income or find alternative financing to satisfy the bank's requirements. That evening, Samuel sat in his father's study, surrounded by the books and papers that represented a lifetime of ranching knowledge and business experience. The room had become a shrine to Jonathan Crawford's memory, preserved exactly as it had been during his final illness, complete with the half-finished letter to a cattle buyer in Denver that would never be completed. The weight of family history and expectation pressed down on Samuel as he contemplated the possibility of being the Crawford who lost everything his ancestors had built. The decision to pursue Morrison's suggestion about the widow in Kansas crystallized, slowly, emerging from the intersection of desperation and pragmatic calculation. Samuel had exhausted his conventional options for saving the ranch, leaving only unconventional approaches that required courage and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. A marriage of convenience might provide the partnership and fresh perspective he needed to revitalize the Broken Arrow, while offering a woman security and a home in exchange for her contributions to the operation. The letter to Kansas took Samuel 3 attempts to compose, as he struggled to present his situation honestly without appearing completely desperate. He described the ranch's potential rather than its current difficulties, emphasized the beauty of the Wyoming landscape and the opportunities for a woman with practical skills to contribute to a growing operation. The letter was both truthful and optimistic, reflecting Samuel's belief that the Broken Arrow could be restored to prosperity with the right partnership and hard work. Writing the letter forced Samuel to articulate his vision for the ranch's future, a vision that had been obscured by the daily struggles of survival but remained alive beneath the surface. He could see the Broken Arrow as it might become: pastures filled with healthy cattle, buildings restored to their former condition, and a household that once again rang with the sounds of productive life. The vision provided hope during the darkest moments of his current situation, reminding him that failure was not inevitable if he could find the right path forward. As Samuel sealed the letter and prepared to ride to town to post it, he reflected on the magnitude of the step he was taking. A marriage of convenience would change his life irrevocably, introducing variables and complications that he could not predict or control. But the alternative, losing the ranch and abandoning his family's legacy, seemed far worse than the uncertainties associated with an unconventional marriage arrangement. The moon rose over the Broken Arrow Ranch as Samuel completed his evening chores, its silver light transforming the struggling operation into something almost beautiful. The same landscape that looked so harsh and unforgiving during the day acquired a mysterious elegance under the night sky, reminding him why his father had chosen this particular valley for the family's new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight Samuel allowed himself to hope that his letter to Kansas might begin the process of saving everything he held dear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks after posting his letter, Samuel Crawford had almost convinced himself that no response would come. Perhaps his description of the ranch's potential had seemed too optimistic, or maybe the widow had found other options that offered more security than a struggling Wyoming spread could provide. He had thrown himself into ranch work with renewed determination, as if physical activity could somehow postpone the inevitable reckoning with Thomas Bradley and the Cheyenne Bank. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, delivered by Jake Morrison, the local postmaster who made weekly rounds to the scattered ranches in the valley. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, noting the careful feminine handwriting that spelled out his name and address with precise, educated strokes. Dear Mr. Crawford, your letter reached me at a time when I was considering several options for my future, and I must confess that your description of Wyoming territory intrigued me greatly. I am Rebecca Miller, recently widowed after my husband's death in a farming accident near Topeka. The circumstances of my situation are somewhat complicated, which I feel obligated to explain before we proceed with any further correspondence. I'm 28 years old, experienced in all aspects of household management, and capable of contributing to agricultural operations through both indoor and outdoor work. I have managed our farm's financial records for the past 8 years and understand the challenges facing agricultural enterprises in uncertain economic times. What I must tell you, however, is that I am not alone in seeking a new beginning. Samuel paused in his reading, wondering what complications the widow might be facing. Perhaps she had debts of her own, or elderly relatives requiring care. He continued reading with growing curiosity. I am currently caring for 8 children, ranging in age from 3 to 15 years. These are not my biological children, but rather youngsters who have been placed in my care through various circumstances. Some orphaned, others temporarily separated from families facing economic hardship. I have been operating an informal fosterage arrangement, providing these children with homes, education and care while their situations are resolved. 8 children. Samuel set the letter down and walked to his kitchen window, staring out at the empty yard where he had imagined a wife might plant flowers or hang laundry. 8 children would transform the Broken Arrow from a quiet, lonely place into something entirely different. The financial implications alone were staggering. Feeding, clothing, and caring for 8 youngsters would require resources he barely possessed for himself. He returned to the letter with a mixture of fascination and concern. I understand that this revelation may change your interest in our correspondence, and I would completely understand if you decided that your situation cannot accommodate such a large household. However, I felt honesty was essential before we proceeded further. These children have become my responsibility and my joy, and I cannot abandon them to pursue my own security. Several of the children contribute meaningfully to household and farm operations. The older ones are experienced in animal care, crop, cultivation, and various domestic tasks. While they would certainly increase household expenses, they would also provide labor that might prove valuable to a ranch operation. If you remain interested in continuing our correspondence despite these circumstances, I would be happy to provide more details about both my own qualifications and the children in my care. I should mention that my husband left a small inheritance, approximately $400, which I had intended to use for establishing a new household. Please understand that I am not seeking charity, but rather a partnership where mutual benefit and respect might grow into genuine affection over time. I believe that frontier life requires practical considerations to take precedence over romantic ideals, though I hope both might eventually flourish together. Respectfully yours, Rebecca Miller. Samuel read the letter 3 more times, each reading revealing new implications and possibilities. 8 children represented chaos, noise, expense, and responsibility beyond anything he had imagined. But 8 children also represented life, energy, hope, and the possibility of transforming the dying broken arrow into a thriving household once again. The $400 Rebecca mentioned would not solve his debt problems, but it would provide breathing room and demonstrate good faith to Thomas Bradley. More importantly, a household of 10 people would require significant agricultural production to sustain itself, potentially providing the motivation and labor force needed to rebuild the ranch's operations. That afternoon, Samuel rode to the Morrison Ranch to seek advice from his neighbor who had originally suggested the correspondence. Henry Morrison was a successful rancher in his 50s, whose own large family had helped build one of the valley's most prosperous operations. If anyone could assess the practical implications of Rebecca's situation, it would be Morrison. 8 children, Morrison repeated after Samuel shared the essential details. Well, that's certainly more than you bargained for. But let me tell you something, Samuel. Children can be a blessing to a ranch operation if they're raised right. My own boys have been working cattle since they could sit a horse, and my daughters manage half the household operations without any help from their mother. Morrison's wife, Catherine, had joined their conversation and offered a woman's perspective on Rebecca's situation. A woman who's been caring for 8 children, keeping house and managing farm finances sounds like someone with exceptional organizational skills. That kind of capability might be exactly what the Broken Arrow needs to get back on its feet. But the expense, Samuel protested. Feeding and clothing 8 extra people, providing medical care, education. I can barely support myself as things stand now. Catherine Morrison smiled with the wisdom of someone who had raised 6 children to adulthood. Children don't eat as much as adults, and they grow most of their own food if you give them garden space and teach them properly. As for clothing, a skilled woman can make most of what they need from basic materials. You'd be surprised how little it costs to maintain a large household if it's managed efficiently. Henry Morrison nodded agreement. The real question is whether you're ready for the responsibility and the chaos. A house full of children changes everything. Your routines, your priorities, your entire way of life. But it also brings purpose and energy that can motivate a man to achieve things he never thought possible. Samuel spent the evening walking the boundaries of his ranch, trying to imagine the property filled with the sounds of children's voices. The empty pastures could support vegetable gardens and small livestock that would feed a large household. The unused outbuildings could be converted into workshops where children could learn trades while contributing to the family income. The Ranch house, which had seemed too large and lonely since his father's death, would finally serve its intended purpose as the center of family life. The decision crystallized slowly, emerging from Samuel's growing conviction that Rebecca Miller's unusual situation might be exactly what the Broken Arrow needed. A conventional marriage would bring one woman to share his struggles, but Rebecca's household would bring the energy and labor force necessary to implement the ambitious plans required to save the ranch. His response letter took 2 days to compose, as Samuel worked to strike the right balance between enthusiasm and realism. Dear Mrs. Miller, your letter surprised me, I must admit, but not in the way you might expect. After considerable reflection, I believe that your situation might complement mine more perfectly than a conventional arrangement could. The Broken Arrow Ranch has been operating far below its potential, partly due to my working alone and partly due to the challenges I've faced in recent years. A household of your size would require significant agricultural production to sustain itself, which would provide the motivation and labor force I need to restore this operation to profitability. I have 3,000 acres of good grazing land, water rights to Miller Creek, and buildings that could accommodate a large household with some modifications. I should be honest about my own circumstances. The ranch is currently in financial difficulty due to livestock losses and family medical expenses, but I believe it can be restored to prosperity with proper management and adequate labor. I owe approximately $3,000 to the Cheyenne Bank, with payments due by the end of October. Your inheritance, combined with increased agricultural production, might provide the foundation for resolving these obligations. Regarding the children, I would welcome the opportunity to provide them with a stable home and useful education in exchange for their contributions to ranch operations. I believe that children benefit from responsibility and meaningful work, and there are certainly enough tasks on this ranch to keep willing hands busy. If you decide to proceed with this arrangement, I would propose a practical timeline. Marriage could be arranged quickly through correspondence with a traveling preacher, allowing you and the children to arrive before winter weather makes travel difficult. The ranch house can accommodate everyone, though arrangements would be modest until we can make improvements. I want to be clear that I am seeking a partnership based on mutual respect and practical cooperation, with the hope that genuine affection might develop over time. I'm not offering romance or luxury, but rather the opportunity to build something meaningful together on land that has great potential. If you are willing to proceed, please send details about yourself and the children, so I can prepare appropriate accommodations. I would also welcome any questions you might have about the ranch or our proposed arrangement. Respectfully, Samuel Crawford. Posting the letter required another trip to town, where Samuel found himself the subject of curious speculation from residents who had noticed his frequent correspondence. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, made pointed comments about the mail he was receiving, while Dr. Williams inquired about whether Samuel might be planning any changes to his living situation. The small-town interest in his personal affairs reminded Samuel that Rebecca and the children would arrive to considerable attention from neighbors eager to assess the newcomers. The valley's social dynamics would inevitably shift with the addition of such a large household, particularly one formed through unusual circumstances. 2 weeks later, Rebecca's response arrived with characteristic efficiency. Dear Samuel, your letter reassured me that we might indeed find mutual benefit in this arrangement. I appreciate your honesty about the ranch's financial situation and your willingness to welcome the children despite the complications they represent. I have arranged for our travel to Wyoming Territory, departing Topeka on October 15th via the Kansas Pacific Railroad to Denver, then north to Cheyenne on the Union Pacific, We should arrive approximately October 20th, weather permitting. I've booked passage for myself and the 8 children, using a portion of my inheritance for travel expenses. Regarding the children, I should provide you with more specific information so you can prepare appropriately. Martha and Mary are twins, age 15, both skilled in cooking, sewing, and household management. They have been my primary assistants in caring for the younger children and managing our domestic operations. David is 14 and experienced in farm work, including animal care and crop cultivation. He is particularly skilled with horses and has expressed interest in learning ranching techniques. James is 12 and shows aptitude for mechanical tasks and building projects. He has helped maintain our farm equipment and buildings. Sarah is 10 and has exceptional abilities with poultry and dairy animals. She also demonstrates artistic talents that might be developed further. Peter is 8 and eager to learn any task assigned to him. He is particularly good with younger children and serves as a bridge between the older and younger groups. Ruth is 6 and helps with domestic tasks appropriate to her age, including garden work and simple cooking. Little Thomas is 3 and requires the most supervision, though he is healthy and generally well-behaved. I have enclosed a recent photograph so you might prepare the children for what to expect from their new home. They are naturally anxious about such a significant change, but they understand the necessity and are prepared to work hard to contribute to our shared success. I am bringing approximately $200 in remaining inheritance funds, along with household goods, tools, and personal belongings that might prove useful. The children's clothing and educational materials are also packed for the journey. I must ask one favor. Please do not feel obligated to proceed with this arrangement if you have second thoughts after reading these details. The children have experienced enough disappointment and uncertainty. If you have any doubts about welcoming such a large household, I would prefer you tell me now rather than after we have made the difficult journey. Assuming you remain committed to our plan, I look forward to beginning our partnership and helping restore the Broken Arrow Ranch to prosperity. Yours truly, Rebecca Miller. The photograph showed a serious-faced woman with dark hair arranged in a practical style, surrounded by 8 children of various ages who looked directly at the camera with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Rebecca Miller appeared, younger than her 28 years, but her face reflected the kind of determined competence that came from managing significant responsibilities successfully. Samuel studied the faces of the children who would soon call the Broken Arrow home, trying to imagine how their presence would transform every aspect of ranch life. The older children looked capable and mature, while the younger ones possessed the resilience that frontier life required. Together, they represented both the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity of his adult life. October 20th was less than 3 weeks away, barely enough time to prepare the ranch house for 10 occupants and arrange for the supplies that such a large household would require. Samuel threw himself into preparations with energy he had not felt since before. His father's illness, driven by the knowledge that failure was no longer an option. Rebecca Miller and 8 children were depending on him to provide the stable home he had promised, and he was determined not to disappoint them. The morning of October 20th dawned crisp and clear, with the first frost of the season painting the pasture grass silver in the early light. Samuel Crawford stood on the platform of the Cheyenne Depot, his best suit brushed clean and his boots polished to a shine he hadn't bothered with in months. In his pocket, he carried a carefully folded marriage certificate that Reverend Phillips had prepared, waiting only for signatures to make his union with Rebecca Miller legal in the eyes of both law and God. The preparations of the past 3 weeks had transformed the Broken Arrow Ranch from a bachelor's lonely retreat into something resembling a family home. Samuel had worked from dawn to dusk, expanding the upstairs sleeping quarters by converting 2 storage rooms into bedrooms, installing additional washstands, and reinforcing the kitchen table to accommodate 10 people at meals. He had purchased supplies in Cheyenne, using credit that stretched his already strained finances further, but the sight of the well-stocked pantry and the bedrooms ready for occupancy gave him confidence that he could provide the stability Rebecca and the children needed. The train's whistle echoed across the prairie as the eastbound passenger service approached the depot, black smoke streaming from its stack as the engineer applied the brakes. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the cars slow to a stop, knowing that his life was about to change irrevocably. Through the windows, he could see passengers gathering their belongings and preparing to disembark, but he could not yet identify the woman and children who would become his instant family. Rebecca Miller stepped down from the third passenger car with the careful grace of someone managing both luggage and the supervision of multiple children. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that showed the careful mending and alteration marks of someone who made the most of limited resources, and her brown hair was arranged in a practical style beneath a modest hat. Even from a distance, Samuel could see the competent efficiency in her movements as she organized the children and their belongings on the platform. The children emerged from the train car like a small parade, each carrying bundles and suitcases that contained their worldly possessions. The twins, Martha and Mary, flanked the group like young generals commanding troops, while David and James immediately began helping the younger children with their luggage. Sarah clutched a wooden cage containing 2 chickens that had somehow survived the journey from Kansas, while Peter held tightly to little Thomas's hand to prevent him from wandering into the crowd. Samuel approached the group with measured steps, his rehearsed greeting dissolving into genuine amazement at the reality of his situation. Here, on a railroad platform in Wyoming territory, stood the family he had acquired through correspondence, a ready-made household that would either save his ranch or overwhelm his resources completely. "Mrs. Miller," he said, removing his hat, as he reached the group. "Welcome to Wyoming territory. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." Rebecca's smile was warm but cautious, the expression of someone who had learned to reserve judgment until circumstances proved themselves reliable. "Mr. Crawford, thank you for meeting us. The children have been very excited to see their new home, though I confess we're all a bit overwhelmed by the magnitude of this change." The children studied Samuel with frank curiosity, ranging from the confident assessment of the older twins to little Thomas's shy retreat behind Rebecca's skirts. Samuel found himself under examination by 8 pairs of eyes that would judge whether he could provide the security and kindness that Rebecca had promised them during the long journey west. "Children," Rebecca said with gentle authority, "this is Mr. Crawford, who has been kind enough to offer us a home at his ranch. I want you to remember your manners and show him the gratitude he deserves for welcoming us." David, the 14-year-old, stepped forward with the serious demeanor of someone accustomed to representing the group in adult interactions. "Sir, we're grateful for the opportunity to work on your ranch and prove ourselves worthy of your kindness. We're all willing to work hard and contribute to the success of your operation." The formal speech touched Samuel with its earnest sincerity, reminding him that these children had learned to present themselves as assets rather than burdens, a survival skill developed through previous uncertainty about their futures. "I'm glad to have you," he replied simply. "There's plenty of work for willing hands, and I think you'll find that the Broken Arrow can become a real home for all of us." The logistics of transporting 10 people and their belongings to the ranch required 2 wagons, which Samuel had borrowed from Henry Morrison for the occasion. The children adapted quickly to the arrangements, with the older ones helping secure luggage, while the younger ones claimed seats with the efficiency of experienced travelers. Rebecca supervised the loading with the organizational skills of someone accustomed to managing complex operations, ensuring that essential items remained accessible while fragile possessions were properly protected. The journey from Cheyenne to the Broken Arrow took most of the afternoon, providing Samuel with his first opportunity to observe the family dynamics that Rebecca had created among her diverse collection of foster children. The twins maintained gentle authority over the younger ones, while David and James worked together to manage practical concerns like securing loose items and watching for rough spots in the road. Sarah entertained Ruth and Peter with stories and songs, while Rebecca kept Thomas comfortable on her lap, despite the wagon's constant jostling. "Tell me about the ranch," Rebecca said during a quiet moment when the children were occupied with watching the scenery. "Your letters described its potential, but I'd like to understand the current reality so I can plan appropriately." Samuel appreciated her directness, recognizing that Rebecca needed practical information rather than diplomatic evasions. "It's been better and it's been worse," he said honestly. "My father built it into a successful operation, but the last few years have been difficult. I'm running about 30 head of cattle on land that could support 10 times that number, and most of the buildings need significant repairs." "And the financial situation?" Rebecca asked quietly, ensuring that their conversation remained private despite the children's proximity. "I owe $3,000 to the bank in Cheyenne, with final payment due at the end of November. Your inheritance will help, but we'll need to generate significant additional income to meet the obligation." Samuel glanced at her to gauge her reaction to this sobering information. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully, showing no signs of alarm at the magnitude of their challenge. 8 children consume considerable resources, but they also produce considerable labor. We'll need to develop a comprehensive plan that maximizes both our land's productivity and everyone's contributions. Her practical response confirmed Samuel's growing impression that Rebecca Miller possessed the kind of frontier pragmatism that could transform challenges into opportunities. Rather than being discouraged by their difficult situation, she seemed energized by the prospect of applying her organizational skills to ranch management. The Broken Arrow came into view as they crested the hill overlooking Miller Creek Valley, and Samuel watched anxiously as Rebecca and the children got their first glimpse of what would become their home. The ranch buildings looked small and weathered against the vast expanse of grassland, while the mountains rising beyond provided dramatic backdrop that emphasized both the beauty and isolation of their location. "It's beautiful," Martha said with genuine appreciation, speaking for the first time since leaving the depot. "Look at all that space for gardens and animals." Mary nodded agreement, already assessing the practical possibilities. "We could have the largest vegetable garden we've ever managed, and there's room for dozens of chickens and maybe some dairy cows." David and James were evaluating the ranch's infrastructure with the critical eyes of young men who understood building and maintenance requirements. "The barn needs some work on the roof," David observed, "but the basic structure looks solid. We could have it weatherproofed before winter if we start immediately." Samuel felt a surge of hope as he listened to the children's comments. Rather than being dismayed by the ranch's obvious needs, they were already planning improvements and solutions. Their enthusiasm reminded him of his own excitement when he had first returned from school to help his father develop the Broken Arrow's potential. The ranch house seemed to expand as it filled with voices and activity for the first time in years. Rebecca moved through the rooms with efficient assessment, noting the practical arrangements Samuel had made while identifying additional modifications that would improve the household's functionality. The children explored their new home with the adaptability of youngsters who had learned not to become too attached to any particular place, though Samuel could see them beginning to relax as they claimed bedrooms and unpacked their few possessions. "You've done excellent work preparing for us," Rebecca told Samuel as they stood in the kitchen watching the children settle in. "The sleeping arrangements are well thought out, and you've stocked supplies that show real understanding of our needs." The marriage ceremony took place that evening in the ranch house parlor, with Reverend Phillips performing a simple service, witnessed by Henry and Catherine Morrison. The children gathered in a semicircle around the couple, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the occasion and their understanding that this legal formality would determine their future security. Rebecca wore her best dress, a dark green, wool that brought out the color of her eyes, while Samuel had donned the same suit he had worn to meet them at the depot. The vows they exchanged were the traditional promises of frontier marriages: commitment to partnership, mutual support, and shared responsibility, rather than declarations of romantic love that neither could honestly make after such brief acquaintance. "Do you, Samuel Crawford, take Rebecca Miller to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Samuel replied, looking directly into Rebecca's eyes and seeing the same practical commitment he felt himself. "Do you, Rebecca Miller, take Samuel Crawford to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Rebecca answered with quiet certainty that suggested she understood exactly what she was promising. The simple gold band that Samuel placed on Rebecca's finger had belonged to his mother, retrieved from the family strongbox for this occasion. The ring represented continuity with the ranch's history, while marking the beginning of its new chapter as home to a large and determined family. Catherine Morrison had prepared a wedding supper that filled the ranch house with more celebration than it had known since before Jonathan Crawford's illness. The children, initially subdued by the formality of the ceremony, gradually relaxed into animated conversation about their plans for contributing to the ranch's success. Their enthusiasm was infectious, creating an atmosphere of optimism that Samuel had not experienced in months. As the evening progressed and the Morrisons departed for their own ranch, Samuel found himself alone with his new family for the first time. The children prepared for bed with the efficient routines of travelers, while Rebecca supervised the settling-in process with gentle authority that maintained order without stifling the excitement of their first night in a new home. "This is quite an adventure we've undertaken," Rebecca said, as she and Samuel stood on the porch after the last child had been tucked into bed. The night sky blazed with stars that seemed impossibly bright after the coal smoke and city lights of the journey west. "It's certainly not what I expected when I first wrote to Kansas," Samuel admitted, "but I have a feeling it might be exactly what the Broken Arrow needed." Rebecca smiled, the first completely relaxed expression he had seen from her since their meeting at the depot. 8 children change everything about a household's rhythm, but they also bring energy and purpose that can transform the most difficult situations. Tomorrow we begin finding out whether our practical partnership can restore this ranch to prosperity. As they prepared to begin their first night as a married couple, sleeping in separate bedrooms as they had agreed until their relationship developed beyond mere convenience, Samuel reflected on the dramatic transformation that had occurred. In a single day, the Broken Arrow Ranch, which had seemed destined for foreclosure and abandonment, now housed a family of 10 people committed to its success. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would no longer face them alone. The Crawford family's first crisis came just 10 days after Rebecca and the children arrived at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Samuel woke before dawn to the sound of cattle bawling in distress, a sound that sent him bolting from his bed and racing toward the pasture in his nightclothes. What he found there nearly stopped his heart. His small herd clustered against the fence, several animals down and thrashing, others standing with their heads hung low in obvious illness. "Poison," he muttered. recognizing the symptoms from a devastating incident on a neighboring ranch 2 years earlier. Something toxic had contaminated their water source or grazing area, and with winter approaching, losing even a few head of cattle could mean the difference between survival and foreclosure. Rebecca appeared at his side within minutes, having heard the commotion and dressed quickly. Behind her came David and James, the older boys alert and ready despite the early hour. The sight of his new family responding instantly to crisis filled Samuel with gratitude, even as he calculated the potential disaster unfolding before them. "What can we do?" Rebecca asked simply, her voice calm despite the obvious severity of the situation. There were no hysterics, no complaints about being awakened, just immediate focus on solving the problem at hand. "We need to move the healthy animals away from whatever they've gotten into," Samuel replied, already planning the emergency response. "Then we'll have to find the source and neutralize it before it spreads further." The next several hours tested every member of the new family in ways that no amount of correspondence could have prepared them for. David proved himself invaluable in handling the cattle, showing an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that allowed him to separate the sick from the healthy with minimal stress to the herd. James demonstrated remarkable problem-solving abilities, systematically checking water sources and grazing areas until he located the culprit, a broken chemical container that had washed down from an abandoned mining claim upstream. The twins, Martha and Mary, took charge of the younger children while managing a household crisis that could have overwhelmed a less organized family. They prepared a substantial breakfast that kept everyone fed during the emergency, organized supplies that might be needed for treating sick animals, and maintained routines that prevented the younger children from becoming frightened by the adults' obvious concern. Sarah surprised everyone by revealing extensive knowledge about animal care that she had gained during her years on various farms. She worked alongside Samuel to treat the affected cattle, mixing remedies and monitoring symptoms with the skill of someone much older than her 10 years. Her gentle manner with the sick animals seemed to calm them, making treatment easier and more effective. Even the youngest children found ways to contribute. Peter took responsibility for gathering eggs and milking their cow, ensuring that normal ranch operations continued despite the crisis. Ruth collected herbs from Rebecca's newly planted medicinal garden, following precise instructions about which plants might help treat livestock illness. Little Thomas, too young for significant tasks, nonetheless helped by staying out of the way and providing emotional support through his cheerful presence. By midday, the immediate crisis had been resolved. 3 cattle had been lost, a significant blow to Samuel's already precarious finances, but the remaining animals showed signs of recovery. More importantly, the family had discovered something valuable about themselves. They worked exceptionally well together under pressure, each person contributing unique skills while supporting the overall effort. "We make a good team," Rebecca observed as they sat down to a delayed lunch, everyone exhausted but satisfied with their morning's work. "I've never seen children respond to emergency with such maturity and capability." Samuel nodded, feeling a surge of pride in his instant family. "Your children have more practical experience than most adults I know. They're going to be tremendous assets to this operation." The poisoning incident marked a turning point in the family's integration. The crisis had forced them to rely on each other completely, breaking down the careful politeness that had characterized their first week together. Now they functioned as a genuine unit, each person understanding their role while remaining flexible enough to adapt as circumstances required. Over the following weeks, the family developed an efficient division of labor that maximized everyone's contributions while respecting individual strengths and limitations. Rebecca assumed overall management of household operations, but her role extended far beyond traditional domestic duties. She maintained detailed financial records, planned resource allocation, and coordinated the complex logistics of feeding, clothing, and educating 8 children while supporting ranch operations. The twins emerged as Rebecca's primary lieutenants, each specializing in different aspects of household management. Martha demonstrated exceptional abilities in food preservation and meal planning, skills that would prove crucial as winter approached. She organized the massive canning operations that processed vegetables from their expanded garden, calculated rations that would sustain 10 people through the cold months, and developed recipes that made limited resources stretch as far as possible. Mary excelled at textile production and maintenance, taking charge of clothing construction and repair for the entire family. Her sewing skills rivaled those of professional seamstresses, allowing the household to maintain respectable appearances despite severely limited resources. She also taught the younger children needlework skills that contributed to the family's self-sufficiency while providing them with valuable trade abilities. David's natural affinity for livestock made him Samuel's primary assistant in cattle operations. The boy possessed an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that allowed him to work effectively with minimal supervision, freeing Samuel to focus on other aspects of ranch management. David's insights about pasture rotation and feed supplementation proved surprisingly sophisticated, suggesting that he had absorbed considerable knowledge during his years on various farms. James revealed mechanical aptitudes that addressed one of the ranch's most pressing needs. His ability to repair and maintain equipment saved the family significant expenses while keeping operations running smoothly. He tackled projects ranging from fixing broken harnesses to reinforcing building foundations, approaching each challenge with systematic analysis that usually produced effective solutions. Sarah's expertise with poultry and dairy operations transformed what had been minimal side enterprises into significant contributors to the family's food security. Under her management, egg production increased dramatically, while milk yields improved through better animal care and feeding practices. She also demonstrated remarkable abilities in animal breeding, selecting breeding stock that produced healthier and more productive offspring. Peter's enthusiasm and willingness to tackle any assigned task made him invaluable as a general assistant who could support anyone needing help. His cheerful attitude and unlimited energy proved particularly valuable during long days of physical labor, while his natural leadership abilities with the younger children relieved adults of constant supervision responsibilities. Ruth and Thomas, though too young for major responsibilities, contributed through age-appropriate tasks that nonetheless supported the family's operations. Ruth's careful attention to garden work and her gentle manner with small animals made her an effective assistant in various agricultural activities. Thomas, despite his tender age, showed remarkable responsibility in caring for his possessions and following instructions that kept him safe while allowing adults to focus on their work. The expanded agricultural operations that supported this large household required systematic planning and careful resource management. Rebecca and Samuel spent evening hours developing comprehensive strategies that would maximize their land's productivity while building the financial foundation necessary to meet their debt obligations. The vegetable garden expanded from Samuel's modest personal plot to encompass nearly 2 acres, producing quantities of food that would have been impossible for one person to manage, but were entirely feasible with multiple workers. The children took pride in their specialized crops: Sarah's prize-winning squash, Peter's perfectly straight rows of beans, Ruth's colorful flower borders that provided seeds for next year's plantings. Livestock operations expanded gradually, but strategically. The family acquired additional chickens through careful breeding programs that Sarah managed with scientific precision. A pair of dairy goats, purchased with part of Rebecca's inheritance, provided milk while requiring less feed than full-sized cattle. Plans were developed for expanding the cattle herd through breeding rather than expensive purchases, using David's expertise to select the most promising combinations. The household's financial situation improved steadily as expenses decreased and income diversified. Rebecca's careful management eliminated waste, while her bulk purchasing strategies reduced costs significantly. The children's labor replaced hired help that Samuel could not afford, while their specialized skills created new income opportunities. Martha's exceptional cooking attracted attention from neighbors who began requesting her services for special occasions. Mary's sewing abilities generated orders for custom clothing from families throughout the valley. James's mechanical skills led to paid repair work for neighboring ranches. Even the younger children contributed financially through sales of eggs, vegetables, and handcrafted items at the local market. The bank payment deadline loomed constantly over these activities, creating pressure that motivated extraordinary efforts from every family member. Samuel shared the financial details honestly with Rebecca and the older children, explaining that their success in meeting the November deadline would determine whether they could keep their home. "We're not just working to improve the ranch," he told them during one of their evening planning sessions. "We're working to save it. If we can't raise enough money by the end of November, we'll lose everything and have to start over somewhere else." The children's response to this sobering information demonstrated their maturity and commitment to their new home. Rather than being discouraged by the magnitude of their challenge, they seemed energized by having a clear goal and a specific timeline for achieving it. "We've faced difficult situations before," David said with quiet determination. "The difference here is that we're working for ourselves instead of just trying to survive until someone else decides our future. That makes all the hard work worthwhile." By early November, their combined efforts had generated remarkable results. The cattle herd, though still small, was healthy and well managed. Agricultural production had exceeded all expectations, providing both food security and surplus crops for sale. The children's various enterprises contributed steady additional income, while their labor eliminated most external expenses. Most importantly, the family had discovered that their partnership worked on every level. Samuel and Rebecca had developed genuine respect and affection that promised to grow into deeper emotions over time. The children had found stability and purpose that allowed their individual talents to flourish. The Broken Arrow Ranch, which had seemed destined for failure, now buzzed with productive activity that suggested a bright future. The first crisis had revealed their strengths and proven their ability to work together under pressure. Now they faced the ultimate test, meeting the bank's deadline and securing their future as a family and as a successful ranch operation. November 15th arrived with an early blizzard that transformed the Wyoming landscape into a white wilderness, cutting the Broken Arrow Ranch off from the outside world at the worst possible moment. Samuel stood at his kitchen window, watching snow pile against the barn doors, while calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to add up to salvation. Despite their extraordinary efforts over the past month, the family had managed to accumulate only $2,400 toward their $3,000 debt, a remarkable achievement under normal circumstances, but still $600 short of preventing foreclosure. The isolation created by the storm meant that Thomas Bradley couldn't travel from Cheyenne to collect payment, but it also prevented Samuel from making desperate last-minute attempts to raise additional funds. They were trapped at the ranch, with their fate hanging in the balance, surrounded by the evidence of their hard work, but facing the possibility that it might not be enough to save their home. Rebecca found Samuel in the parlor that evening, staring into the fire with the hollow expression of a man watching his dreams crumble despite his best efforts. The children had gone to bed early, exhausted by the day's struggle to keep livestock fed and watered during the storm. unaware that their parents faced a crisis that could scatter their new family to the winds. The arithmetic hasn't changed. In the last hour, Rebecca said gently, settling beside him on the worn sofa. Staring at those ledger books won't make more money appear. Samuel managed a bitter smile. No, but it might help me figure out where I went wrong. We worked harder than any family should have to work, and it still wasn't enough. Maybe I was foolish to think we could save this place. You weren't foolish, Rebecca replied firmly. You were desperate, and desperate people sometimes attempt impossible things. The difference is that we nearly succeeded. $2,400 in 6 weeks is an extraordinary accomplishment. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the parlor door. Martha peered inside, her face showing the careful concern of someone who had learned to read adult moods accurately. Excuse me, but we couldn't help overhearing. Are we really going to lose the ranch? Samuel and Rebecca exchanged glances, realizing that their attempts to shield the children from the full severity of their situation had been less successful than they had hoped. The older children, at least, understood enough about their circumstances to recognize the approaching crisis. Come in, all of you, Rebecca called, recognizing that honesty would serve better than continued attempts at protection. If this affects your future, you deserve to know the truth. The children filed into the parlor with the serious expressions of young people accustomed to facing difficult realities. David and James positioned themselves near the adults, while the twins flanked the younger children in a protective formation that spoke to their family's strong bonds despite its brief existence. Samuel took a deep breath and explained their financial situation with the same honesty he would have shown adult partners. The children listened without interruption as he detailed their debt, their income, and the shortfall that threatened their home. His voice remained steady until he reached the conclusion that none of them wanted to hear. If we can't raise $600 more by the end of the month, the bank will foreclose on the ranch. We'll have to leave Wyoming and start over somewhere, else probably separating until I can find work that pays enough to support everyone. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Little Thomas, who rarely spoke during serious family discussions, looked up from his position on Mary's lap with the innocent directness that only a 3-year-old could manage. "Why don't we sell my treasure?" he asked, patting the small leather pouch he always kept tied to his belt. "Mama Rebecca said treasures are for when people need help." The adult smiled at his generous offer, but Rebecca gently explained that his collection of pretty rocks and interesting feathers, while precious to him, wouldn't solve their financial problems. Thomas accepted this explanation with the philosophical resignation of childhood, but his gesture sparked something unexpected in his older siblings. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly, sitting up straighter as an idea began to form. "Thomas might be onto something, just not in the way he thinks." She disappeared from the parlor and returned minutes later carrying a wooden box that contained her most prized possessions, a collection of rocks and minerals she had gathered during their travels across Kansas and Wyoming. But these weren't the random pebbles of childhood fancy. Sarah had an eye for unusual specimens, and her collection included several pieces that sparkled with metallic veins. "I found these in the creek bed behind the barn," she explained, opening the box to reveal dozens of small stones that glittered in the firelight. "Some of them are really heavy, and they have gold-colored streaks running through them." Samuel's heart began racing as he examined Sarah's collection more closely. His father had done some prospecting in his younger days and had taught Samuel to recognize the difference between fool's gold and genuine precious metal. The samples Sarah had collected showed promise, more promise than he dared hope for without professional assessment. "James," he said, trying to keep excitement out of his voice, "tomorrow, when the storm breaks, I want you to help me examine the creek bed where Sarah found these. If there's any chance—" The family spent a restless night, torn between hope and the fear of disappointment. Sarah's discovery might represent salvation or merely another cruel twist in their struggle for survival. But for the first time in weeks, Samuel fell asleep with something other than despair weighing on his mind. The storm cleared on November 17th, revealing a landscape transformed by knee-deep snow that made movement difficult but not impossible. Samuel and the older children made their way to Miller Creek, following Sarah's directions to the bend where she had made her discoveries. What they found there made Samuel's pulse race with possibilities he barely dared consider. The creek bed showed clear evidence of mineral deposits with gold-bearing quartz veins, exposed where spring runoff had washed away topsoil and loose rock. More importantly, the placer deposits in the stream's gravel contained flakes and nuggets of genuine gold, not enough to make them wealthy, but potentially sufficient to close the gap in their debt payment. "This is real," Samuel said, his voice hoarse with emotion as he held up a nugget the size of his thumbnail. "Sarah, you found gold on our own property." The family threw themselves into impromptu mining operations with the same determination they had shown in every other crisis. David and James constructed a crude sluice box using lumber salvaged from the barn, while the twins organized supply lines that kept the workers fed and warm during long hours of cold, wet labor. Even the youngest children contributed by sorting through processed gravel to find overlooked flakes. The work was backbreaking and frequently discouraging. Hours of effort might yield only a few dollars worth of gold dust, barely enough to justify the physical toll. But gradually, their accumulated treasure grew. Sarah's keen eye for promising locations led to several productive discoveries, while James's mechanical innovations improved their processing efficiency. By November 25th, with only 5 days remaining before the payment deadline, they had extracted nearly $400 worth of gold from Miller Creek. Combined with their existing funds, they were tantalizingly close to their goal, but still $200 short of the full amount owed. The final breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mary, who had been quietly working on a special project during the evening hours, presented Samuel and Rebecca with a beautifully crafted quilt that represented weeks of secret labor. The intricate design and flawless execution demonstrated skills that surpassed anything she had previously created. Mrs. Henderson in town mentioned that wealthy families in Denver pay premium prices for handcrafted quilts of exceptional quality, Mary explained. "I thought perhaps we could telegraph her contacts and see if anyone might be interested in purchasing this on short notice." The quilt was indeed extraordinary, combining traditional patterns with innovative touches that made it a genuine work of art. More importantly, Mary had unknowingly created exactly the kind of luxury item that prosperous city families sought as symbols of frontier authenticity. Samuel's desperate telegram to Denver found an eager buyer, the wife of a mining magnate who collected Western crafts and was willing to pay $300 for immediate delivery of Mary's quilt. The amount was more than they needed to complete their debt payment, providing a buffer that would ease their financial pressure while they developed longer-term strategies. The family's celebration was subdued but deeply felt. They had saved their home through a combination of extraordinary effort, remarkable luck, and the unique talents that each member brought to their collective struggle. More importantly, they had proven to themselves that they could overcome seemingly impossible challenges when they worked together. Thomas Bradley arrived at the Broken Arrow on November 30th, prepared to begin foreclosure proceedings, but hoping to find some alternative arrangement that might preserve the Crawford family's home. What he found instead was Samuel waiting with the full payment, counted out in a mixture of cash, gold dust, and a bank draft from Denver. "I confess I'm surprised," Bradley said, as he prepared the receipt that would clear the ranch's debt. When I left Cheyenne, I was expecting to discuss payment plans or partial settlements. Full payment seemed highly unlikely, given your situation 6 weeks ago. Samuel smiled, looking out at the snow-covered ranch where his children were already, planning next year's improvements. We had help, he said simply. More help than I ever expected when I first wrote that letter to Kansas. The banker's curiosity was evident, but Samuel chose not to elaborate on the remarkable series of events that had saved the Broken Arrow. Some stories were too complex for brief explanations, and the full tale of their success would require more time than a business transaction allowed. As Bradley's buggy disappeared down the snow-packed road toward Cheyenne, Samuel stood on his porch, surrounded by the family that had transformed his failing ranch into a thriving operation. The debt was paid, the ranch was secure, and the future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities that none of them could have imagined just 2 months earlier. Rebecca joined him on the porch, slipping her arm through his with the natural affection that had grown between them during their weeks of shared struggle. "What happens now?" she asked, watching the children build snow forts in the yard with the exuberant energy of young people who knew they were home to stay. "Now we build," Samuel replied, pulling her closer against the cold wind. "We've proven we can survive anything when we work together. It's time to find out what we can accomplish when we're not fighting for survival." Spring of 1884 arrived at the Broken Arrow Ranch like a promise fulfilled. The snow melted to reveal pastures that had been carefully managed through the winter, buildings that showed fresh repairs and improvements, and gardens already planted with twice the acreage of the previous year. Samuel Crawford stood in his expanded barnyard, watching his children work with the efficient coordination of a seasoned crew, and marveled at how completely his life had transformed in less than 6 months. The gold discovery in Miller Creek had provided more than just the funds needed to save the ranch. It had given the family confidence in their ability to overcome challenges and revealed capabilities that none of them had fully recognized before. More importantly, it had proven that their partnership was genuine, not just a marriage of convenience, but a true merging of talents and dreams that made extraordinary achievements possible. Rebecca emerged from the ranch house carrying the morning mail, her face glowing with the kind of quiet satisfaction that came from managing a complex household successfully. The transformation in her appearance was remarkable. The careful worry lines that had marked her features during their early weeks together had been replaced by the confident bearing of a woman who knew her worth and felt secure in her place. 2. More orders for Mary's quilts, she announced, waving letters from Denver and Colorado Springs, and an inquiry from a family in San Francisco who heard about her work through Mrs. Henderson's connections. At this rate, she'll need to train the younger girls to help with the basic piecing work. Mary looked up from the chicken coop where she was collecting eggs, her face flushed with pride at this recognition of her artistic abilities. At 16, she had developed from a quiet foster child into a confident young woman whose needlework commanded premium prices throughout the territory. Her success had inspired the other children to develop their own specialties, creating multiple income streams that strengthened the family's financial security. "I've been thinking about that," Mary replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ruth shows real talent with color combinations, and even little Thomas can help with cutting fabric squares. If we organize it properly, we could triple our production without sacrificing quality." Samuel felt a surge of pride as he listened to Mary discuss business strategy with the sophistication of an experienced entrepreneur. All of the children had grown remarkably during their months at the Broken Arrow, developing confidence and capabilities that would serve them well, regardless of what paths their lives eventually took. The ranch operations had expanded far beyond Samuel's original dreams, driven by the children's enthusiasm and Rebecca's organizational genius. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a failing cattle operation had evolved into a diversified agricultural enterprise that generated income from multiple sources while providing security for a large family. David had proven himself so capable with livestock that Samuel had begun treating him as a full partner in planning breeding programs and pasture management. The boy's insights about animal behavior had led to innovations that improved both productivity and animal welfare, while his natural leadership abilities made him invaluable in training the younger children in ranch skills. The Henderson bull is ready for breeding season, David reported, consulting the detailed records he maintained about each animal's health and breeding history. I think we should pair him with the 3 heifers from the Morrison Ranch. The genetics look promising for producing stock that can handle harsh winters while maintaining good weight gain. James had transformed the ranch's infrastructure through his mechanical innovations and construction projects. His workshop, built during the winter months, now produced custom equipment that neighboring ranchers commissioned for their own operations. His reputation for solving complex mechanical problems had spread throughout the valley, creating another source of income while reducing the family's dependence on expensive outside contractors. "I've finished the new irrigation system for the south pasture," James announced, his clothes bearing the honest dirt of productive labor. "It should increase our hay production by at least 30%, and the overflow channels will prevent erosion during heavy spring runoff." Sarah's management of the ranch's smaller livestock had become a model of efficiency that attracted visitors from other operations seeking to learn her methods. Her chicken flocks now produced enough eggs to supply 3 neighboring ranches, while her dairy goats provided milk, cheese, and breeding stock that commanded premium prices at regional markets. "The incubator hatched 23 chicks from the last batch," Sarah reported with satisfaction. "All healthy, good size, and showing the characteristics we've been selecting for. I think we're ready to start marketing breeding stock to other ranchers who want to improve their flocks." Peter had discovered an unexpected talent for horsemanship that made him invaluable in managing the ranch's expanding cattle herd. Despite his young age, he possessed an intuitive understanding of horse behavior that allowed him to train animals with remarkable success. His gentle methods produced horses that were not only well-trained, but genuinely cooperative, making all ranch work more efficient and safer. Even the youngest children had found meaningful ways to contribute to the family's success. Ruth had become the ranch's unofficial botanist, cataloging native plants and developing a medicinal herb garden that provided remedies for both human and animal ailments. Her careful observations about which plants grew best in different soil conditions had informed the family's crop rotation strategies, improving yields across all their agricultural enterprises. Little Thomas, now 4 years old, had assumed responsibility for the ranch's smaller animals, rabbits, cats, and the various pets that had accumulated around a household full of children. His gentle nature made him exceptionally effective at socializing young animals, while his cheerful presence brightened everyone's spirits during long days of hard work. The success of their various enterprises had attracted attention from throughout the territory. Agricultural journals had published articles about their innovative approaches to diversified farming, while business publications featured Rebecca's household management methods as examples of frontier efficiency. The family had received invitations to speak at farmers' conventions and women's organizations, though they carefully limited such activities to avoid interference with their primary focus on ranch operations. More significantly, their success had begun attracting other families seeking similar opportunities. 3 different widows had written inquiring about positions as housekeepers or assistant managers, while several young men had requested employment as ranch hands. The Broken Arrow was developing a reputation as a place where hard work and innovation were rewarded, where families could build security and prosperity through cooperation and determination. "We have decisions to make about expansion," Rebecca said, as she and Samuel reviewed their financial records after the children had gone to bed. "We're generating more income than we can reinvest in current operations, and we're receiving inquiries about partnerships and employment that suggest opportunities for growth." Samuel nodded, recognizing that their success was creating its own challenges. The ranch that had once struggled to support one man now generated enough income to support multiple families, while their various enterprises required management. A tension that was approaching the limits of what their current household could handle. "What do you think about the Morrison proposal?" he asked, referring to an offer from their neighbor to purchase adjoining land that would double the Broken Arrow's acreage. The expansion would provide room for larger cattle herds and additional agricultural operations, but it would also require significant investment and additional labor. "I think we should consider it seriously," Rebecca replied, her tone reflecting the careful analysis she brought to all major decisions. "The children are developing skills that could support much larger operations, and the income streams we've established could finance expansion without borrowing. More importantly, growth would provide opportunities for the older children to take on genuine leadership roles." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the front door, unusual at such a late hour, but not unprecedented in frontier communities where emergencies required neighborly assistance. Samuel opened the doctor to find Dr. Harrison from Cheyenne, the territorial physician who served the scattered ranching communities throughout the region. "I apologize for the late hour," Dr. Harrison said, removing his hat as he entered the parlor. "I've been traveling from the Morrison Ranch, where I was treating their youngest boy for pneumonia. I heard remarkable things about your household's success, and I wanted to discuss a proposition that might benefit everyone involved." Dr. Harrison's proposal proved both intriguing and challenging. He had been contacted by the territorial government about establishing a model agricultural demonstration project that would showcase innovative farming and ranching techniques for other settlers. The Broken Arrow's success made it an ideal candidate for such a program, which would provide government funding for expansion while requiring the family to host visitors and document their methods for broader distribution. The compensation would be substantial, Dr. Harrison explained, outlining financial terms that exceeded their current income from all sources combined. But the responsibilities would be significant as well. You'd essentially become teachers and demonstrators, sharing your methods with other families throughout the territory. The opportunity represented a dramatic expansion of their role from successful ranchers to regional leaders in agricultural development. It would provide financial security beyond anything Samuel had imagined when he first wrote to Kansas, while offering the children educational and professional opportunities that could shape their entire futures. "We'll need to discuss this as a family," Rebecca said, recognizing that such a significant change would affect everyone's life. "The children have as much invested in our success as we do, and they deserve a voice in decisions about our future direction." The family meeting that followed Dr. Harrison's departure revealed the maturity and wisdom that the children had developed through their months of shared challenges and achievements. Rather than being overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity, they approached it with the same systematic analysis they applied to ranch problems. "It would mean sharing our home with strangers regularly," Martha observed, considering the practical implications. "We'd need to modify our routines and prepare accommodations for visitors who might not understand our methods initially. But it would also mean that our techniques could help hundreds of other families succeed," David added, showing the generous perspective that characterized his approach to challenges. "If our methods work for us, they might work for other people, facing similar difficulties. The discussion continued late into the evening, covering every aspect of the proposal and its potential impact on their lives. In the end, the decision was unanimous. They would accept the government's offer and transform the Broken Arrow Ranch into a demonstration project that could benefit frontier families throughout the Western Territories. As the family prepared for bed after reaching their momentous decision, Samuel reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. Less than a year earlier, he had been a failing rancher facing foreclosure and abandonment. Now he stood at the head of a thriving household that had become a model for agricultural success throughout Wyoming Territory. The transformation had been possible only because of the remarkable woman and 8 exceptional children who had answered his desperate letter to Kansas. What he had intended as a marriage of convenience had become a true partnership that multiplied everyone's capabilities while creating opportunities none of them could have achieved alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began preparing for their expanded role as teachers and demonstrators. But tonight, Samuel felt profound gratitude for the family that had saved not just his ranch, but his entire life, turning failure into success and isolation into belonging. The first delegation arrived at the Broken Arrow Ranch on a humid July morning in 1884. 3 wagons loaded with families from eastern Colorado who had traveled over 200 miles to observe the Crawford family's agricultural innovations. Samuel watched from his porch as the visitors organized their camp in the designated area beside Miller Creek, noting their mixture of hope and skepticism as they surveyed the thriving operation that had become their destination. Leading the group was William Patterson, a county agricultural agent from Denver who had convinced 12 struggling farming families to make the journey after reading government reports about the Broken Arrow's success. Patterson's own expression reflected professional curiosity mixed with doubt. He had seen too many supposed agricultural miracles that proved to be temporary flukes or outright deceptions. "Mr. Crawford," Patterson said as he approached the ranch, House removing his hat with formal courtesy, "thank you for agreeing to host our group. I must admit, your operation appears even more impressive than the report suggested, though I'm curious to understand how sustainable your methods might be for families with more limited resources." The question struck at the heart of Samuel's concerns about their new role as demonstration hosts. The Broken Arrow's success had been built on the unique combination of circumstances: a large household of capable workers, diverse skills, and the desperate motivation that had driven their initial efforts. Whether their methods could be adapted by conventional farming families remained to be proven. Rebecca joined them, carrying a ledger that contained detailed records of their production costs, labor requirements, and income from various enterprises. Her systematic documentation would provide the foundation for answering Patterson's skeptical questions with concrete data rather than enthusiastic claims. "Our success has been built on principles that can be adapted to different circumstances," she said, opening the ledger to pages filled with careful calculations. "The key is matching your methods to your available resources, while maintaining focus on multiple income streams rather than depending on single crops." The demonstration program officially began that afternoon with a comprehensive tour that showcased each aspect of the ranch's operations. The visiting families followed David through the cattle pastures, observing the rotation system that maintained grass health while maximizing grazing efficiency. His explanations revealed sophisticated understanding of soil management and animal nutrition that impressed even the experienced farmers in the group. "The secret isn't having more land," David explained as they examined fence lines that showed minimal wear despite heavy use. "It's using your land more intelligently. We run more cattle per acre than most ranches, but we move them frequently enough to prevent overgrazing. The grass stays healthy, the cattle stay healthy, and we maximize production from our acreage. James's workshop attracted particular attention from the men in the visiting group, who recognized the value of being able to manufacture and repair equipment rather than purchasing everything from distant suppliers. His demonstration of irrigation system construction drew requests for detailed plans, while his modified plow design generated immediate interest from farmers struggling with rocky soil conditions. Most of what I've built started with problems we needed to solve, James explained as he demonstrated the gear system that powered his irrigation pump. I look at what we need, figure out what materials we have available, and design something that uses our resources efficiently. The key is being willing to experiment and learn from failures. The women in the delegation gravitated toward Rebecca, and the girls, eager to understand the household management systems that supported such a large family while generating significant income through domestic enterprises. Martha's food preservation techniques drew admiration from wives who struggled to feed smaller families through harsh winters, while Mary's quilting operation provided a model for turning traditional women's work into substantial business income. Organization is everything, Rebecca explained, as she showed visitors through the expanded pantry and storage areas. With proper planning, a large household can actually be more efficient than a small one because you can buy in bulk, process food in large batches, and specialize different family members in different tasks. Sarah's livestock management demonstration proved particularly valuable for families seeking to diversify beyond traditional crops. Her chicken operation, goat dairy, and rabbit breeding programs showed how small livestock could provide protein, income, and breeding stock without requiring the capital investment that cattle ranching demanded. Start small and build gradually, Sarah advised as she showed visitors her detailed breeding records. Each animal you add should pay for itself through production or breeding income before you invest in the next expansion. That way, you're always building on success rather than gambling with resources you can't afford to lose. The most challenging aspect of the demonstration program involved addressing the underlying question that no one wanted to voice directly: whether the Broken Arrow's success depended on having 8 children available as unpaid labor. The visiting families averaged 3 or 4 children each, and their adults showed obvious concern about whether smaller households could implement similar systems. Peter's horse training demonstration addressed this concern by showing how proper animal handling could multiply the effectiveness of limited human resources. His methods produced horses that worked cooperatively rather than requiring constant supervision, allowing one person to accomplish tasks that might otherwise require several workers. Good training means less work for everyone, Peter explained as he demonstrated ground-driving techniques that allowed horses to work independently. If you invest time in training properly, your animals become partners instead of just tools. That makes every job easier and safer. The visiting families spent 3 days at the Broken Arrow, participating in daily routines while learning techniques that could be adapted to their own operations. The experience proved valuable for both hosts and guests, as the Crawford family discovered which of their methods translated well to different circumstances and which required modification for smaller-scale operations. Evening discussions around the campfire revealed the deeper challenges facing frontier families beyond mere technical knowledge. Many of the visiting families struggled with isolation, limited access to markets, and the psychological burden of constant uncertainty about weather, prices, and economic conditions that could destroy years of work overnight. The hardest part isn't the physical work, admitted Eleanor Watson, a widow from eastern Colorado who was trying to maintain a farm with 2 young sons. It's the loneliness and the fear that you're making mistakes that will cost your children their future. When you're working alone, every decision feels overwhelming. Rebecca's response drew from her own experience managing 8 children while contributing to major agricultural operations. That's why we've tried to build connections with neighboring families and create systems that don't depend on anyone. In person's constant attention. If something happens to me, the household can continue functioning because everyone understands their responsibilities. The demonstration program's success led to requests from territorial officials for expanded activities that would reach more families throughout Wyoming and neighboring territories. Samuel found himself invited to agricultural conferences, asked to contribute articles to farming publications, and consulted by government agencies developing rural development policies. More significantly, the Broken Arrow began attracting young adults seeking training in innovative agricultural techniques. The first apprentice was Michael Harrison, Dr. Harrison's nephew, who arrived in August, requesting the opportunity to learn ranch management while contributing his labor to ongoing operations. "I've read about your methods in the Denver papers," Michael explained during his interview with Samuel and Rebecca. "My family has a ranch in Colorado that's struggling with the same problems you've solved here. I'd like to learn your techniques so I can help them implement similar systems." Michael's presence marked the beginning of a formal apprenticeship program that would eventually attract dozens of young people seeking practical agricultural education. The program provided additional labor for the ranch's expanding operations, while generating income through tuition fees and creating a network of trained practitioners who could spread the Broken Arrow's innovations throughout the region. The success of their teaching role brought unexpected challenges as the family struggled to balance their educational responsibilities with their primary focus on ranch operations. The constant presence of visitors and apprentices disrupted established routines while requiring additional resources for accommodation and instruction. "We're becoming a school instead of a ranch," Martha observed during one of their regular family meetings. "I'm not complaining, but we need to decide whether we're primarily farmers who teach or teachers who farm. The balance is getting difficult to maintain." The observation sparked lengthy discussions about their future direction and the potential need to formalize their educational activities through partnerships with territorial institutions. Dr. Harrison had mentioned the possibility of establishing an official agricultural college that would incorporate the Broken Arrow's practical methods with formal academic instruction. "We could maintain our ranch operations while adding classroom facilities and dormitories for students," Rebecca suggested, outlining a vision that would transform their property into a comprehensive agricultural education center. The ranch would provide practical training opportunities, while the college would offer the theoretical knowledge that supports long-term success. The proposal represented another dramatic expansion of their role, moving beyond demonstration farming to become institutional leaders in agricultural education. Samuel recognized both the opportunities and risks associated with such growth, understanding that success would require capabilities beyond anything they had previously attempted. The decision came during their evening family council, when David made an observation that crystallized their thinking about future directions. "We started this because we needed to save our home," he said, with the mature perspective that characterized his approach to complex problems. "Now we have the chance to help save other people's homes. That seems like a natural progression." His words reminded everyone that their success had been built on the principle of mutual assistance, the same spirit that had brought Rebecca and the children to Wyoming when Samuel needed help. Now they had the opportunity to extend that assistance to other families facing similar challenges. The unanimous decision to pursue the agricultural college proposal marked another turning point in the Broken Arrow's evolution. They would maintain their identity as a working ranch, while adding the infrastructure and programs necessary to train the next generation of innovative farmers and ranchers. As autumn approached, and the summer's teaching season drew to a close. Samuel reflected on how completely their lives had changed since that desperate morning when he had written to Kansas, seeking a practical marriage partner. The struggling rancher who had faced foreclosure had become a regional leader in agricultural innovation, while his marriage of convenience had evolved into a partnership that created opportunities neither could have achieved alone. The 8 children who had seemed like overwhelming complications when Rebecca first mentioned them had become the foundation of everything they had accomplished. Their diverse talents, cooperative spirit, and willingness to embrace challenges had transformed not just the Broken Arrow Ranch, but the entire approach to frontier agriculture throughout the territory. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges and new opportunities to extend their influence beyond Wyoming's borders. But tonight, Samuel felt profound satisfaction in knowing that their family's success had become a source of hope and practical assistance for countless other families seeking to build security and prosperity in America's challenging frontier regions. 2 years later, in the autumn of 1886, the Broken Arrow Agricultural Institute officially opened its doors to the first class of 36 students from 7 different territories. The transformation of Samuel Crawford's failing ranch into a regional center of agricultural innovation had attracted attention from as far away as Washington, D.C., where territorial development officials cited the institute as a model for practical education that could transform America's frontier regions. The campus bore little resemblance to the struggling operation that Samuel had nearly lost to foreclosure just 3 years earlier. New buildings constructed with lumber from James's expanded sawmill operation housed classrooms, laboratories, and dormitories that accommodated students and instructors from across the Western Territories. The original ranch house had been expanded into an administrative center and family residence that managed to maintain its welcoming character despite its increased size and importance. Rebecca stood in the Institute's main classroom, addressing the diverse assembly of students who had traveled hundreds of miles to learn the agricultural methods that had transformed the Crawford family's fortunes. At 31, she had evolved from a desperate widow seeking security into a respected educator whose publications on household management and small-scale agricultural economics were studied throughout the frontier regions. Success in frontier agriculture requires understanding that every resource has multiple potential uses, she explained, gesturing toward charts that illustrated crop rotation systems, livestock integration, and the economic relationships between different farm enterprises. Your goal is not to maximize production of any single commodity, but to create sustainable systems that provide security even when individual components face challenges. The students represented the diversity that characterized America's expanding frontier: young men and women from failed farming operations, immigrants seeking to establish agricultural enterprises, and established farmers hoping to improve their methods. Many carried stories similar to Samuel's original desperation, facing financial pressures and uncertain futures that made the Institute's practical training their last hope for achieving stability. David Crawford, now 19 and serving as the Institute's livestock management instructor, moved among the students with the quiet confidence of someone whose expertise had been proven through years of successful application. His transformation from a 14-year-old foster child into a recognized authority on cattle breeding and pasture management exemplified the opportunities that frontier education could create for young people willing to embrace challenges. The key to successful breeding programs is understanding that you're selecting for characteristics that will be valuable 5 years from now, not just current market preferences, David explained as he demonstrated record-keeping systems that tracked genetic traits across multiple generations. Short-term thinking produces short-term results, but building lasting success requires patience and systematic planning. His students included several young women whose presence reflected changing attitudes about gender roles in agricultural education. The institute had attracted national attention for its policy of accepting qualified applicants regardless of gender, recognizing that frontier success often depended on partnerships where both men and women contributed essential skills to agricultural operations. Martha and Mary, now 20, and serving as instructors in domestic sciences and textile production, had developed curriculum that challenged traditional assumptions about women's roles in frontier economies. Their courses demonstrated how household management skills could generate substantial income while supporting larger agricultural operations through efficient resource utilization and value-added processing. A skilled household manager is essentially running a small manufacturing operation, Martha explained to a class of ranch wives who had enrolled in the Institute's summer program for established families. Food preservation, clothing production, and household goods manufacturing can provide income streams that make the difference between prosperity and failure for agricultural enterprises. Mary's quilting workshops had evolved into comprehensive courses on textile production that covered everything from fiber processing to marketing finished goods. Her students learned not just technical skills, but business methods that could transform traditional women's work into profitable enterprises that contributed significantly to family income. The difference between a hobby and a business is systematic approach to production and marketing, Mary explained, as she demonstrated efficient cutting techniques that minimized waste while maximizing productivity. When you treat your work as a professional enterprise, you can command professional prices for your products. James had become the Institute's mechanical arts instructor, developing courses that taught students to design and build equipment adapted to their specific circumstances and resources. His workshop produced innovations that were copied throughout the territory, while his students learned problem-solving approaches that could be applied to any mechanical challenge they might encounter. Engineering is just organized common sense, James told his students as they worked on projects ranging from improved plows to water management systems. You identify what you need to accomplish, figure out what materials and tools you have available, and design solutions that use your resources efficiently. The principles are the same whether you're building a chicken coop or a steam engine. Sarah's courses in small livestock management had attracted students from urban areas who recognized the potential for small-scale animal production to supplement other income sources. Her systematic approach to breeding, feeding, and marketing had proven that significant profits could be generated from operations that required minimal capital investment while fitting into limited space. Small livestock operations succeed because they're flexible and efficient, Sarah explained to a mixed class of farmers and town residents. You can adjust your scale quickly in response to market changes, and your investment per animal is low enough that individual losses don't threaten your entire operation. The Institute's success had created opportunities for the younger children as well. Peter, now 13, served as head of the Institute's horseback riding program, teaching students proper animal handling while managing a breeding operation that supplied trained horses to ranchers throughout the region. His natural ability with animals had been refined through formal study, making him one of the youngest professional horse trainers in the territory. Ruth, 11 years old, had become the Institute's botanical specialist, maintaining extensive gardens that provided both educational opportunities and practical resources for the campus community. Her work with medicinal plants had attracted attention from physicians seeking alternatives to expensive manufactured drugs, while her vegetable production innovations were copied by farmers seeking to maximize yields from limited garden space. Even Thomas, now 7, contributed to the Institute's operations through his work with the small animals that were used for educational demonstrations. His gentle nature and patience made him ideal for socializing young animals, while his enthusiasm for his work inspired students who might otherwise have been intimidated by livestock management responsibilities. The financial success of the Institute had exceeded everyone's expectations, generating revenue that supported not only the educational programs, but also continued expansion of the original ranch operations. The combination of tuition fees, agricultural production, and sales of equipment and publications had created a diversified income base that provided security while funding research into new agricultural techniques. More importantly, the Institute's graduates were spreading the Crawford family's innovations throughout the Western Territories, creating a network of successful operations that validated their methods while extending their influence far beyond Wyoming's borders. Success stories arrived regularly from former students who had implemented the Institute's techniques on their own land, often achieving dramatic improvements in productivity and profitability. The recognition had brought Samuel and Rebecca invitations to address agricultural conferences, contribute to government policy discussions, and consult on territorial development projects. Their opinions were sought by officials planning railroad development, irrigation projects, and settlement programs that could benefit from their expertise in sustainable frontier agriculture. "We've become something I never expected when I first wrote that letter to Kansas," Samuel confided to Rebecca during one of their evening walks around the campus grounds. "I was just trying to save a failing ranch, and somehow we've ended up influencing agricultural policy for the entire western frontier." Rebecca smiled, remembering her own desperation when she had first read Samuel's advertisement and wondered whether a man would accept a woman with 8 children. "I think we succeeded because we were both desperate enough to try unconventional approaches. Desperation can be a powerful motivator if you channel it constructively." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram from the territorial governor, requesting Samuel's participation in a federal commission studying agricultural development throughout the Western Territories. The appointment would require travel to Washington, D.C., and involvement in policy decisions that could affect millions of settlers seeking to establish farms and ranches in challenging frontier conditions. The federal appointment represented another expansion of Samuel's influence, moving beyond regional recognition to national leadership in agricultural policy. The opportunity was both honor and responsibility, acknowledging his expertise while requiring him to balance personal obligations with public service that could benefit countless frontier families. The family meeting that discussed the federal appointment revealed how completely their perspectives had changed since their early days of struggling for survival. Instead of focusing on what the opportunity might mean for their personal advancement, the discussion centered on how Samuel's participation could serve the broader goal of helping other families achieve agricultural success. If you can influence federal policy to support the kind of practical education we've developed here, it could help establish institutes like ours throughout the frontier regions, David observed, with the strategic thinking that characterized his approach to complex problems. The impact could be enormous compared to what we can accomplish working alone. Martha added practical considerations about maintaining the Institute's operations during Samuel's absence, while Mary suggested that the federal appointment could provide opportunities to market their publications and equipment to a much larger audience. Even the younger children understood that their father's recognition reflected the success of their entire family enterprise. The decision to accept the federal appointment marked another milestone in the family's evolution from desperate survivors to national leaders in agricultural innovation. Samuel would spend part of each year in Washington, D.C., working with government officials to develop policies that supported practical agricultural education while maintaining his primary residence and work at the Broken Arrow Institute. The appointment also formalized Rebecca's role as the Institute's primary administrator, recognizing capabilities that had been essential to their success, but had often been overshadowed by Samuel's more visible public role. Her systematic approach to complex operations made her ideal for managing the Institute's continued expansion, while Samuel focused on policy work at the national level. As 1886 drew to a close, the Crawford family reflected on achievements that exceeded anything they had imagined during their early days of desperate cooperation. The struggling rancher, who had married a widow out of duty, had become a national expert on agricultural policy. The woman who had sought security for 8 foster children had created an educational institution that served hundreds of students while generating sustainable prosperity. Most remarkably, the 8 children who had once been viewed as complications, requiring careful management, had become the foundation of innovations that were transforming frontier agriculture throughout America's Western territories. Their individual talents, cooperative spirit, and willingness to embrace challenges had created opportunities that none of them could have achieved alone. The story was far from over, but its essential themes had been established through years of shared struggle and remarkable success. A family formed through practical necessity had discovered that genuine partnership could achieve results beyond anything that individual effort might accomplish. Their legacy was being written not just in their own prosperity, but in the countless families whose lives had been improved by innovations that began with a desperate letter to Kansas, and 8 children who gave a struggling rancher far more than he had ever expected. 10 years after that desperate morning when Samuel Crawford had penned his letter to Kansas, he stood before the United States Congress delivering testimony that would shape agricultural policy for generations. The House Committee on Territories had summoned him to Washington, D.C. to present findings from his federal commission work, but more importantly, to share the story of how practical education and family cooperation had transformed not just one failing ranch, but the entire approach to frontier development. "Honorable members," Samuel began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man whose words were backed by proven results. "When I first wrote to a widow in Kansas seeking a marriage, of convenience, I thought I was simply trying to save my family's ranch from foreclosure. I had no idea that I was about to embark on an experiment that would demonstrate the untapped potential of America's frontier families." The congressional chamber was unusually quiet as Samuel recounted the arrival of Rebecca and 8 children, their early struggles, and the systematic innovations that had emerged from necessity. His testimony wove together personal narrative with policy recommendations, showing how individual success stories could be replicated through targeted support for practical education and cooperative agricultural development. The key discovery was that frontier families possess remarkable capabilities when they're given proper knowledge and support systems, Samuel continued, referencing detailed statistics from the Broken Arrow Institute's decade of operations. "Our graduates have established over 300 successful agricultural operations across 12 territories, generating millions of dollars in economic activity while providing food security for thousands of families." In the gallery above the chamber floor, Rebecca watched her husband address the nation's lawmakers with pride that had been earned through years of shared struggle and remarkable achievement. At 36, she had evolved from a desperate widow into a nationally recognized expert on rural education, whose textbooks were used in agricultural schools throughout America. Her journey from seeking basic security to influencing national policy embodied the opportunities that frontier life could provide for women willing to embrace unconventional paths. Beside her sat their children, now young adults whose individual achievements reflected the opportunities that had emerged from their unusual upbringing. David, at 24, had been appointed Territorial Livestock Commissioner for Wyoming, the youngest person ever to hold such a position. His expertise in animal breeding and pasture management was sought by ranchers from Texas to Montana, while his innovations in drought-resistant cattle had helped countless families survive harsh seasons that might otherwise have destroyed their livelihoods. Martha and Mary, now 25, had established their own educational institution in Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Institute for Domestic Sciences, which trained women in household management, textile production, and small business development. Their curriculum challenged traditional assumptions about women's economic roles, while providing practical skills that enabled graduates to contribute significantly to family income and community development. James had founded Crawford Agricultural Equipment Company, manufacturing the mechanical innovations he had developed during their early years at the Broken Arrow. His designs were used on farms throughout the Western Territories, while his engineering principles were taught in technical schools from California to Nebraska. At 23, he employed over 100 workers and held patents on dozens of agricultural implements that had revolutionized frontier farming. Sarah's work in sustainable livestock management had earned her appointment as consultant to the Bureau of Animal Industry, making her one of the first women to hold a federal position in agricultural administration. Her breeding programs and management techniques were studied by agricultural colleges throughout the country, while her publications on small-scale livestock production had become standard references for frontier families seeking to diversify their operations. Peter, now 18, managed the largest horse training operation in Wyoming Territory, supplying trained animals to ranches, military posts, and civilian transportation companies across the region. His methods combined traditional techniques with innovative approaches that produced horses known for their reliability and cooperative temperament. His success had attracted students from as far away as Europe, where his reputation for excellence in animal training had spread through international agricultural networks. Ruth, at 16, had become the youngest person ever admitted to the newly established College of Agriculture at the University of Nebraska, where she studied botanical sciences while continuing her research into medicinal plants and sustainable farming practices. Her work on drought-resistant crops showed promise for revolutionizing agriculture in arid regions, while her publications on natural remedies provided alternatives to expensive manufactured medicines for frontier families. Even Thomas, now 12, had found his calling in veterinary medicine, working alongside territorial animal doctors while preparing for formal education that would make him one of the first veterinarians trained specifically for frontier conditions. His gentle nature and intuitive understanding of animal behavior made him exceptionally effective in treating livestock diseases and injuries that could devastate frontier agricultural operations. Samuel's congressional testimony concluded with policy recommendations that reflected decades of practical experience in frontier development. His proposals for agricultural education, cooperative extension services, and targeted support for innovative farming families would eventually become foundational elements of federal rural development policy, influencing legislation that served American agriculture well into the 20th century. The frontier is not a place for individualistic heroics, Samuel told the assembled lawmakers in his closing remarks. It is a laboratory for cooperative innovation, where families working together can achieve results that would be impossible for individuals working alone. Federal policy should support these cooperative efforts by providing education, research, and communication networks that allow successful innovations to spread rapidly throughout frontier regions. The standing ovation that greeted Samuel's testimony reflected congressional recognition that his family's story represented more than individual success. It demonstrated a model for frontier development that could be replicated throughout America's expanding territories. The legislation that eventually emerged from these hearings established agricultural extension services, rural education programs, and cooperative development initiatives that served American farmers for generations. Following the congressional hearings, the Crawford family gathered for their annual reunion at the original Broken Arrow Ranch, now the historic centerpiece of an educational complex that served over 500 students annually. The buildings that had once housed a desperate man and his failing cattle operation now anchored an institution that had trained thousands of agricultural professionals while generating millions of dollars in economic development for Wyoming Territory. The family dinner that evening brought together not just Samuel, Rebecca, and their 8 children, but also dozens of grandchildren, former students and colleagues whose lives had been shaped by the innovations that had emerged from their original marriage of convenience. The gathering represented a living network of agricultural professionals whose work was transforming frontier regions throughout North America. When I first read Papa's letter in Kansas, Rebecca said during the traditional toast that concluded their reunion dinner, I thought I was seeking basic security for 8 children who needed a home. I never imagined that we were beginning an adventure that would touch so many lives and create opportunities beyond anything we could have dreamed. Samuel raised his glass, looking around the table at faces that represented the continuing expansion of their original family's influence. The letter I wrote was born from desperation, but it was answered by grace. Rebecca didn't just bring me 8 children, she brought me the future, and together we've built something that will continue long after we're gone. The toast was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram announcing that the territorial legislature had voted to establish the Crawford Agricultural College as Wyoming's first state university, ensuring that the educational innovations developed at the Broken Arrow would continue serving future generations of frontier families. The news provided a fitting capstone to their reunion, confirming that their legacy would extend far beyond their individual lifetimes. As the evening wound down and family members prepared to return to their scattered homes and responsibilities, throughout the American West, Samuel walked alone through the ranch buildings where his transformation had begun. The barn, where he had once stored his father's failing dreams, now housed laboratories where students conducted research that would benefit agriculture throughout the world. The pastures, where he had watched his cattle die from poison, now supported breeding programs that had revolutionized livestock production across multiple territories. The ranch house where he had written his desperate letter to Kansas had been preserved as a museum, complete with the desk where his correspondence with Rebecca had begun, and the parlor where they had been married by Reverend Phillips on that October evening in 1883. Visitors from around the world came to see the humble origins of innovations that had transformed frontier agriculture, while students studied the methods that had emerged from necessity and grown into systematic approaches to sustainable farming. The story of the struggling rancher who married a widow out of duty and received 8 children who gave him back everything he never expected had become more than family history. It had become a testament to the transformative power of cooperation, innovation, and the willingness to embrace unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. Rebecca joined Samuel on the porch, where they had shared so many evening conversations during their years of building dreams from desperate circumstances. At 51 and 46 respectively, They had achieved recognition and influence that extended far beyond their original hopes for simple survival. But their greatest satisfaction came from knowing that their partnership had created opportunities for countless other families to build security and prosperity on America's challenging frontier. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't answered your letter?" Rebecca asked, settling beside him on the swing that James had built during their second year together. Samuel considered the question seriously, as he had many times over the years. "I think the ranch would have been foreclosed, and I would have ended up working for wages somewhere, probably never owning land again. But more importantly, 8 remarkable children would have grown up in different circumstances, and they might never have had the opportunities to develop the talents that have benefited so many people. And I would have remained a widow, struggling to care for foster children with no real security or future prospects," Rebecca added. "Our marriage of convenience became the foundation for achievements that neither of us could have accomplished. Alone, the stars that blazed overhead were the same stars that had witnessed their wedding vows 13 years earlier, when 2 desperate people had pledged to build a partnership based on practical necessity rather than romantic love. That practical foundation had proven more durable than either had dared hope, growing into genuine affection and mutual respect that had sustained them through challenges and successes that tested every aspect of their relationship. Their legacy would continue through their children's work, their students' achievements, and the countless families whose lives had been improved by innovations that began with a desperate letter to Kansas and were answered by a woman brave enough to travel west with 8 children who needed a home. The struggling rancher had married her out of duty, but she had given him back not just the 8 children he never expected, but a future filled with possibilities that transformed individual desperation into national inspiration. The circle was complete, but the story continued in the lives of every family that found hope and practical assistance through the institutions, policies, and innovations that had emerged from one man's desperate attempt to save his failing ranch and one woman's courageous decision to answer his call for help. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.